there are...
There is a policy. I think the best person to go to would be your HR if they haven't already gone to that. But I'm not sure. I don't have the particular policy. You're right. So the goal of this is to understand what is bullying and then what you can do to take care of yourself or if you're a witness to it and that kind of. It's more of a, it's not going to get into your policies and procedures. It's going to define what's bullying and how it can translate across the board and how it can become almost like a culture, and then who you in the resources that you have. But I won't be going over your specific policy. But if you want and you want to call, I think HR is going to be your best, or your EEO will be the best avenue to look at what bullying encompasses, because some people may call it harassment. It may fit within that.
Yeah, some of the same, criteria, like, using foul language, and stuff like that, falls under harassment.
Okay, so let's talk about, when we talk about bullying, it's not just something that happens on the playground or on the internet, and it doesn't just happen to kids. But we don't have to accept it as a normal, everyday part of life. And so, because it unfortunately does happen in the work environment, and that's what we're going to be talking specifically about today. So we're going to learn exactly what is bullying, what's the definition, what constitutes bullying, what are some behavioral observations we can make that indicate to us that we or someone else is being bullied. And sometimes people fail to recognize certain behaviors as bullying. Sometimes they just miss it and fail to see that the process is harming everyone in the workplace, not just the person being targeted. Not that that's not enough, but sometimes it's, like I said, it can be kind of a culture that's created. And the impact can be vast. It can impact job productivity, turnover, attendance, morale, employee health. And many employees fear disclosure and internalize the shame of being bullied. So many supervisors also might prefer to ignore it because they don't know how to handle it. So hopefully when we talk, we'll see the definitions. We'll see, and there's a lot of gray. There is a lot of gray. There's a lot of referring back to your policies and things like that. But hopefully at the end of this, you'll feel like bullying is not something you have to get used to, where you can go, who you can talk to. If one avenue is not feeling comfortable for you, there's other avenues, and how to deal with it. So what is bullying? Bullying is beyond just two people not getting along. So obviously people pretty much know that it intimidates and threatens and mistreats a vulnerable person. But what's really the key component is that bullying attacks the person rather than criticizing the work of the person. It's often targeted, it's persistent, it can be covert, it can be direct, it can be confrontational. A person may become intimidated and feel like they have no place to turn. They feel like they're between a rock and a hard place, and because they might feel retaliation, but then they also might have some shame or deny the extent of the bullying. They think, well, maybe if I just ignore it, it'll go away. Some people feel hostage to the situation, and they become depressed and anxious and suicidal. So, and in the workplace, you do have a limited ability to defend yourself sometimes from these consequences. So, but I want to let you know what the resources are, and we're going to talk about that, and I'll repeat it a lot just to make sure that you know where you can go. But what I really want to point out is that bullying attacks the person rather than criticizing the work. So it's beyond just feeling like you're getting a hard time because your work just never seems right. Because if it's focused on the work and not some other personal attacks, then it's not maybe so much, maybe it's a hard situation, maybe it's very difficult and very stressful. I'm not denying that, but it might not qualify as bullying. So let's talk about what are some examples. So these first two people kind of, sorry, was somebody going to say something? Okay. So the first two is physical intimidation, yelling or cursing. So those are things that we would imagine bullying would be. So these are just some examples, but some of these are can be kind of surprising. Obviously, invalid, severe, unwarranted criticism, excessive micromanaging. I don't mean that the manager, the supervisor, is a micromanager. Micromanaging in itself is not bullying. It's a supervisor style that most people don't really enjoy, I'll be honest. But it can be their style, and it can increase under stress. And you see this sometimes when people are micromanagers. And those of you who have ever had a supervisor that's a micromanager, you can almost predict when exactly they're going to be the mega micromanager and when they won't. So when deadlines are coming up, or big projects or big events are coming up and money's on the line, or something's on the line, some big result is going to occur, the micromanagement gets really intense, and then it kind of might loosen up a bit. But some people are just micromanagers. This is excessive. This is extreme. This is where it wears on your soul type of micromanagement. Deliberately sabotaging another person's work, making false accusations, humiliating. So all these, socially isolating, the harmful and malicious gossip, and not keeping another informed of important information. So that could be withholding information from them purposefully, not just they were negligent and didn't really think, and dismissive, which is its own problem, but it may not be bullying because, again, it's targeting and malicious negative intent towards an individual. And so when you look at bullying and think, gosh, you know, I think some of these things are going on, one, we don't want to minimize it. We don't want to say, oh, well, you know, if I was just less difficult, they wouldn't be like this, or something like blame ourselves. But we also don't want to say that somebody's a bully when maybe they're a really hard, stressful person to work with, that they don't have a malicious intent to hurt us, that kind of thing. But it's good to know these examples because you might inadvertently participate in some of these because it becomes a norm, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But to know, am I participating in making fun of another person publicly? Am I participating in creating gossip, assuming things about the person and then making stuff, well, I bet she blah, 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 or I bet he does this? Am I keeping information from them because it will give me more of an advantage, and I'm not the only one that does it, so it shouldn't matter. And so sometimes if other people are doing it, we kind of think it's okay.
Heather, this is Tom.
Yes.
So would perhaps removing a manager from their management position and changing their office location and not assigning them any work, could that be bullying tactic?
It could be, but again, this is very individual. So it might be that sometimes people are moved for other reasons. Sometimes it's better for the whole group if a person's in a different setting. And so, and there's a lot of, you know, sometimes people are placed elsewhere as a benefit, not only a protection, not only to the other employees, but to the manager themselves. So it really just kind of depends. So that's the hard thing, I think. This is the third time I've given this talk with you guys, and I have to say the hardest part for me is really defining, because bullying is very subjective, and to define that clear line. So if you're in doubt, I'd always recommend not holding it a secret, not keeping it under, you know, or not holding denial. If you feel like something's going on, run it across somebody else that is in that kind of equal role. So, and somebody that will be honest with you that you feel safe with, that kind of thing. Because also, if you're a manager, you can call EAP, and we do this thing called management consults, and they're unlimited, they're included, they're totally free. I've had people call numerous times, and we'll tell you if that's not really, you know, I can understand it's very difficult, and let's talk to HR, let's figure out if this is within your policy, but we'll tell you if maybe it's just something else going on too. And not that we would know because we don't work there, but I'm just saying we'll give that honest feedback, is what I mean. But that's a good question. For those of you that are not comfortable verbally asking questions, there's a Q&A and a chat on the side of the webinar, and you're welcome to use that. If you want me to see it privately, then put presenter on there. If you want Joy to see it, you put host, and if you want both of us, you put host and presenter, and then you could put all participants if you want them to see, everybody to see. So you can send that, and I'll try to keep up with the questions as best I can. Okay. I do want to point out, too, again, remember bullying is targeting and with malicious intent another person. So what I do want to point out is sometimes stress comes in, and people don't act as they would want to act when they're fully stressed. You know, when the stress is high, and we're all that way. We kind of default, and we're not always pleasant to work with. Not that everything we do when we're under stress is appropriate or the right way to react. We aren't our best selves. Let me just put it that way. So sometimes you have organizational pressures, and you have things like, and I've been with EAP while you guys went through the furloughs, and, you know, there's been lots of changes, and it can get difficult because the organization has to survive, and so they have to do things to survive. And I'm not saying, please don't take that as the organization's in any kind of danger or anything like that. But what I mean is government changes, presidential changes, anything can change the face of a government agency. And so with funding and projects and things like that, things get put to the side, and then there's more pressure to complete projects, there's less money to do it, there's less staff, things like that. So that can put, as far as a manager, in a really difficult situation. So in that situation, it's really important that communication is very clear, but that doesn't mean, so the manager or supervisors or upper levels may get tough to work with, but again, but it may not be that their intention is to be a bully. So it doesn't mean that you can't talk to somebody about some inappropriate behaviors and excuse it. I'm just saying that we've got to kind of separate between organizational stressors and an actual person targeting another employee and being a bully for that power and control. So let's go. Does anybody else want to add anything? Okay. So how prevalent is it? So according to Suffolk University Law School in Boston, bullying in the workplace is not uncommon. So there's 37% of all office workers have experienced bullying. So but I don't want it to be something, oh, well, it's not really uncommon, it happens a lot, so let's just get used to it. We don't want to normalize it. We don't want to make it an everyday part of life and make it something that we should just get used to. However, what's interesting is when you include witnesses, you've got 49%. So 1 out of almost every 2 people has witnessed or been a part of bullying. That's a huge percentage. And it's very significant because it can make not only the person being bullied uncomfortable, but the employees, the other employees that are witnessing it, be uncomfortable. And they might even be coerced just from silent peer pressure because everybody else is doing something to act in a way that they probably wouldn't, they may not normally act, like participate in jokes that they wouldn't normally participate in another setting, or isolate somebody or label somebody as weird or strange when they wouldn't normally do that. But because everybody else does it, it must be what we do, and it just starts to become normal and accepted. And so the problem is, if you're familiar with psychology, if you have an undergrad in psychology, or if you have some background in psychology, you might know, or education, you might know Bandura. He is a psychologist and researcher, and he developed the social learning theory. And so what he found, he did a experiment, and it was in the 60s, and he took a video of a woman beating up a Bobo clown, which is a Bobo doll. If you don't know what this is, it's a inflatable doll, or inflatable clown, and the clown face is just kind of printed on there. And on the bottom it has sand, so you can knock it over, but it will bounce back. And so kids can run and jump and fall all on it, and it'll bounce right back. You don't have to pick it up. So it's like a weeble wobble if you're my age. So, and what they did is they watched a video of a woman beating up the Bobo doll, and she would hit it, and she threw it, and she hit it with this hammer. And then they had 2 kids. So one group of kids watched the video, the other group didn't. So the one group that watched the video, what was striking is they did the same exact behaviors as the woman on the video. They took it on and they started doing it. So what we're talking about is, and think about how that could play in with bullying. So from the victim of the bullying standpoint, you don't want to tolerate it. You don't want to endure it. You don't want to say, well, it's just me. Sometimes if we've been bullied as children, we think there's something about me that's wrong and I deserve to be bullied. And then what happens is bullies start to, it's almost like a bully magnet on some level. And I don't mean to say that it's in no way anybody's fault when they're being bullied. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's somebody who is a victim and they get victimized repeatedly. And so it can happen when they're an adult as well. And so they tolerate, so what happens is there's kind of this enabling, and they don't feel like they can tell. And so that's part of this talk, is that if you do feel like you're being bullied, please share it, please tell somebody, and let's see what we can figure out. But the other problem that I'm concerned about too is the witnesses. So when you have something like that Bobo doll experiment, and children saw it, it made it okay on some level because it was an authority that was doing it. And so it started to get everybody across the board. And so it just starts to be like, well, that person's just this way. And so, I mean, we have to talk to them that way. We have to get their attention. We have to say that. Otherwise, they won't do their job. Or, gosh, we always have to harp on them. So it becomes a norm. It becomes a norm for the victim. It becomes a norm for the group. And so that's something that we have to be very careful of and fight against if we can. So I got a good question. What if you feel like you can't trust management and supervisors to ask questions? So that's a really good question. I would recommend, there's multiple resources that you can talk to. But I would say go to somebody that you feel comfortable with. And if you don't feel comfortable or safe going to a supervisor or management or member of management, then don't. That's fine. But go to HR. A lot of you do not have HR on site, so it's going to be a phone call to your regional HR. It's also going to be, you have your EEO office. That's another one. You don't have to just call them when you're trying to file a grievance. You can call them to ask a question, to get answers on policies, to get, is this a hostile work environment? You know, that kind of thing. This is what I've noted. And they'll let you know what your rights are. The other place that you can always call is EAP. So we're a separate agency, but we can provide support, because ultimately at the end of this, if you feel like you're being bullied, the most important piece is that you feel good about yourself and you take care of yourself. And that, to me, and of course I'm a therapist, so I'm biased, but if you can walk away and you know that you're doing what's true to yourself and you're feeling good about yourself and being able to take care of yourself, then that's a good route. That's the ultimate piece. That's the most important thing, because no matter where you are in the world, whether you're at home, whether you're at work, whether this job, another job, you take care of yourself and have your own and respect yourself and feel good about who you are. That's the goal, ultimately, no matter how anybody ever treats you. Okay, so how does it impact the workplace? So we talked about this. I talked about this earlier, but it has an emotional cost. But the bottom line, the financial line for the company, for the agency, for wherever, is also impacted. It affects not only the people involved, it affects the observers. When there can be absenteeism, there can be a decreased quality of work, lower morale, because what happens is work sometimes has to get shifted in order for employees to cope with the bullying. If they're bullying, they don't want to be there. They don't want to do the work. They don't have the morale. They might leave the job. And so then you have to get new employees and train new employees. It takes more time. So it's a lot of stress not only on the agency, but on the coworkers, on the supervisors, the management team, everybody involved. And so it has almost like a ripple-like effect across. So it's not just the victim, which is bad enough, but it's everybody else involved. And how does it affect you and your health if you're a victim of bullying? So any major stressor will have these reactions, and these are some risks that can be involved. And I'm not saying that you have to have all of these occur if there's bullying. I'm just saying that these are some risks that could occur. So, if the bullying is the source of the stress, you could have cardiovascular issues, digestive, the stomach, you're just not hungry, or your stomach's in knots. It's fear sometimes. Musculoskeletal issues, addictions. You can turn to drugs or alcohol, but you could also go for an escape, such as gambling, internet addictions, other types of thinking outside of the box with addictions. Insomnia, anxiety, and depression. And I have another question, so in the chat box. Okay, so this person brought up having a history of bullying. Okay, and this is really good to look at the impact. This person has a history of bullying. It's been addressed. Management did intervene, but they're talking about the after effects. So how do you feel better? So that is a perfect reason to call EAP and have that one-on-one counseling, or do something to support yourself and not blame yourself and feel like you're the reason for the bullying. You shoulda, woulda, coulda, and the bullying wouldn't have happened type thinking. Get rid of that. So sometimes it can be really impactful, and it can follow you even after the bullying stops. So then call EAP, or if you don't want to call EAP, go through your insurance or go get a private counselor or just talk to a friend about it, whatever works for you. Or go do something to take care of yourself. Maybe you're thinking, counseling, talking, but I really love fishing, or I really love hiking. Go do that more for yourself and make sure that self-talk is very positive and very much, I'm not to blame, this was addressed, I stood up for myself, the things that you did well and that you're proud of. Good question. Okay, so there's two types of bullying styles. It doesn't always have to be, I think the stereotypical bully is the one in your face yelling, their face is all red, they're screaming at you. That's what we picture. But there can be, so that's aggressive, it's confrontational, they have absolutely no respect, total disregard for the other person, their feelings, their rights, those aren't even considered. And they just want to get their needs met. They just want what they want. They're going to make you submit until they get what they want. So it's about power and control. Passive-aggressive, if you've ever seen a classic, perfect example of this is if you've ever seen the movie or read the book Mean Girls. It's that underhanded sabotage type thing, the thing you sometimes, and this is difficult, especially if you're going to bring it to management or HR or somebody higher up, because it's hard to pinpoint. And this is detrimental too, but it's very hard to pinpoint, but you know that it's happening, and it's happening in several arenas. And ultimately you can pinpoint it, but it's just a little difficult at first. But let's talk about what that looks like. So obviously, you can see the aggressive ones, physical intimidation, yelling, cursing. So somebody tell me what they would consider passive-aggressive, or if they've seen passive-aggressive type bullying.
When they don't give you the information that you need.
Yes. And and what you know it's passive-aggressive when it's consistent. So it's not just one time. It's not just one time you needed that information. It was really imperative. You had a document due, or you had a project and it needed to be, paperwork needed to be completed, or some information like the deadline changed or something like that. It's not they did that one time and they just don't really seem to care. It's when there's a consistent pattern. And it's always like, oh, gosh, totally forgot to invite you to that meeting, but it's repeated, that kind of thing. That's a good example. That's a good pointing out. Anybody else? Sometimes if somebody targets you, they'll sabotage your work. They don't want to give you credit for what you've done. and they don't want to acknowledge what you've done. They don't want to acknowledge that that you did it correctly. And so one way to bounce this off is you go to somebody that also is qualified in doing your job. Not like they would take your job from you, but I mean just kind of like they're a peer, you know. So as a counselor, I will go to a peer who does counseling as well, and maybe even somebody that's more skilled than me. That would be my ideal, is to go to somebody that has more experience or more skilled and run something by them and be completely receptive to the idea that I might have done. I take my ego out of it and I present to them, this is my approach, and this is what I was thinking, this is my process, this is what I thought would work and would help this person. I'd love to hear your feedback. And they might say, you know, that was a horrible idea because da-da-da-da-da. Or they might say, you know what, you could do it that way, but you could also do it this way, whatever. So it's a good thing to run that across, because sometimes maybe there is difficulty doing your job, and maybe there's a learning curve that you have, and so there needs to be a lot of attention to that. And it's not necessarily about you, it's about the work. Maybe the work's not a good fit for you, but this is when you do your work, you know your work, you always have done it well, and then it's starting to get personal. But sometimes when somebody doesn't like, so bringing me all the way to the passive-aggressive point, is when somebody doesn't like you and they're targeting you and they have a malicious intent, then they might not be able to give you credit or see the work and the value in what you do. And so that's when it can be bullying, and that could be somewhat passive-aggressive too, because they don't realize that you really are doing good work. They are really thinking that you're not doing good work when you actually are, but they are targeting you, so they don't want to see it, if that makes sense.
That almost sounds like micromanagement.
It can be. And that can be also if you have that same viewpoint and you're really hard on somebody, and the excessive micromanagement. And the other thing is, are they micromanaging? Another thing to look at is that excessive micromanagement on one person versus they do that with every single staff that walks through the door. You know, and usually with a micromanager, you can talk to your coworker and they'll be like, I know, they have the same patterns with everybody. It's when that pattern changes with one person that it becomes a problem. So these could go either way. A lot of them making false accusations. Socially isolating, they just forgot to invite them. Oh, yeah, you know, you were back there in that back cubicle. I just forgot you were back there. Sorry, we all went to lunch and had a great time. Or we all went after work. I just forgot to mention that. And then also, you know, gossip. But that's more aggressive because you're actively talking about someone. Anything anybody else wants to add? Okay. I hear somebody. I don't know if they're trying to talk on the phone, though. I can't hear quite. Okay. So what can you do? So there's several things you can do if you are a coworker bullied, and hopefully this awareness will constitute some action if it needs to be taken. So being aware, recognizing the behavior, understanding that it is never about the victim or the work. It's the bully's need to have power and a sense of control. It's about them and what they want and them meeting their needs. It's not about, you know, and sometimes I feel like it can happen when somebody is, there's a fine line. Because sometimes people will do things that will make them different from other people. And they don't care. They don't have an interest in being part of a team. They're just difficult to get along with. So that's a difficult personality. That's not technically bullying. That's just something that's difficult. Because they may not care if anybody likes the work that they do or likes them or invites them to anywhere. And so they just kind of set themselves apart. So some people do that naturally. But, you know, we have to be careful, though, because sometimes people just are socialized a little differently, and they are a little different, and so we just kind of start to think it's okay to treat them differently. So we have to understand, so that being said, sorry. So what I mean is basically, if somebody doesn't care about their work and their work is being addressed, it's about their work. You know, that would be easier if their personality was more of a team player. They wanted to be, you know, more involved. But this, what I'm talking about is they just don't like them as a person, so nothing they can do is right, and it's on all aspects. Because if they don't like that person, they're targeting that person, they're not just going to target them on their work. It's going to be multiple layers there when it's bullying. If you feel like you're being bullied, document the behavior, and then report the behavior to appropriate staff. So, again, HR, EEO, management, if you want support, always please call EAP. We're there to help you through that. And we specialize in job-related stress. So that's what we're here for, is job-related. I mean, we're here for any issue, whether it's just you had a bad morning all the way to, you know, you're in a severe depression. But it's really, we do a lot with job-related stress too. So strong communication can help. Know your job description. Make sure it's clear to you. A lot of times there is I've seen this, and this reminds me, there's another resource you have, which is CATER, which is your conflict and dispute resolution. And it's the mediation process, which is a really great service because we have other agencies that don't have mediation, and I really wish they did, because even if you don't use it, it's a great service to have. It's completely voluntary. You can't be forced into it. But it's a great support that you have provided to you. So, but I've seen a lot of conflict, because one thing that we do is management consult. So if you're a manager and you don't know what's going on, like I talked about before, please call us and we can do a consult of what's best for your team. How could you help your team get to the level of, you know, how could you work together better or make it a better environment or help with stress management or whatever. But I've seen a lot of discrepancies between supervisors and employees because there's a miscommunication and expectations. And a lot of times, if many of you probably have that line in your job description that says any other duties as assigned by supervisor, which always gets you. But anyway, I know I have that line in multiple jobs I've had. So, but anyway, sometimes just clarifying that and understanding what the expectations are and understanding why there's a discrepancy and why the problem's occurring. But if you feel like you need additional resources to do your job, then that's where you can ask and see what can be done. And if anything, sometimes there can't be anything, but at least you can verbalize it. Having a good buddy at work, that is one of those, I don't know if you've ever heard of employment engagement, but that is one of the things that just makes work so much better for people is, does their best friend work with them, or do they have a really good friend at work? And that can also help you feel better at work. You have somebody, if you feel like you're being bullied or you are witnessing bullying, that can have a detrimental effect in a difficult work environment, then you can have a buddy and that will help ease that. I'm not saying that, again, to just put up with it. I'm saying these are ways to kind of cope while the process is occurring. Know your proper channels. And so we talked about that, and we're going to talk about who they are, but we talked about EEO, supervisors, HR, EAP. And you have, especially if you're a witness, you have the power to set some boundaries for bullying behaviors, and we're going to talk about exactly what you can do. One of the things is making assumptions. You might see a behavior, but don't make a hasty judgment about it. Don't assume they're bullying. Don't assume that somebody else is needing to be really harshly corrected because of a behavior. You have to look into it, inquire about it, but try to be as non-judgmental or attacking or blaming or scolding as you can. Because sometimes we get heated. Sometimes we get stressed. And I don't know if you've ever had a moment where your workload's so high, you're so stressed, and then you see the person next to you and they look like they're texting on their phone, and you just like go, you're in your head screaming. You know, you may not actually scream, but you may be like, oh my gosh, I'm buried and they're looking at their phone. Well, don't make a judgment. Maybe they haven't looked at their phone all day. They're buried too, and they're using their lunch minute to look at, we don't know. They're using their lunch time to take a break to connect with their kid who just had their first day of school or something. I don't know. So we just don't know. We don't know what's going on. Maybe it was an emergency text. I don't know. We don't want to assume that they're not doing what they have to do, what they need to do. So what is it like? What would it be like if you arrived at work and there's, you know, a lot of people have found on these calls because they feel like there's a bullying issue. So what would that be like, feel like, and how would people interact with each other if there's no bullying?
Well, there'd be good and calm communication.
There'd be trust. There'd be rapport. You'd feel like if you did say something, you wouldn't get harassed for it.
A relief.
A relief. Be easier to be at work.
Smiles, enjoyment, and actually people doing their work.
Yes.
Maybe a feeling of being secure, knowing that you have coworkers that will support you.
Yep.
Not walking on eggshells.
Yes, that's a big one. Walking on eggshells, definitely.
Not having anxiety attacks before you go to work.
Yes. So, and for some of you, if you're experiencing that, again, I know I'm harping on it, calling EAP, finding out what's best for you, what's getting connected with somebody so you can feel happier, feel better, feel more at peace, you know, regardless of your situation. But somebody asked a really good question that kind of leads to this of, can you explain a little more about not being the cause of bullying? This is important. So sometimes you have to create your own culture. It's not fun. It's not something that you are supposed to do. But sometimes in a culture where you feel like there's hostility, you might be the only sense of solace for somebody. And I don't mean you have to be their therapist, but I mean you can still, what you're talking about, walking on eggshells, not, you know, being or having the anxiety attacks and feeling like you can trust somebody. Maybe you're going to be that person that is trustworthy. Maybe you're going to be that one that is able to do their work and do the work that they take pride in. Let me put it that way. And so that's when, and it starts to trickle out, just like the bullying trickles out, and that can trickle out as well. And keeping that self-care, keeping that positive view for yourself, realizing that, yes, I like this part of my job, I want to do this, I'm going to do, you know, I do a good job, and being open to that and being that, and especially because what you don't want to do is if you start to feed into the negativity, then you're perpetrating the bullying. And we don't want to do that. And I have another question, so hold on. Okay, so somebody asked about supervisors often withholding information. Now, sometimes there's a fine line. Sometimes supervisors, as a supervisor, you have to weigh the information that you're going to release. Now, maybe it's not that important. Like maybe it's, you know, oh, the project is extended a day, or I don't know. Maybe that's probably pretty important. But, you know, maybe it's just some sort of information that is, it could go either way, and that's not something that should, and some people are really poor communicators too. So yes, this is a really complicated answer, but some people are poor communicators and they're inconsistent about releasing information. Sometimes the information is super sensitive, and if they release it in the wrong manner, it could really send a ripple through the staff and have a really detrimental effect, so they need to kind of relay this in a different way so that people, the morale is not totally deflated or whatever. And so that's their responsibility. And I think a lot of managers, I would hope that managers feel some sort of pressure about giving some news that might decrease morale and how to do it. But I think when you're looking at withholding information, it's got to be consistent, but if it's, and that's negligence if they're not. So the question was, is it negligence or bullying? How do you decipher? So it's negligence if they don't if they just withhold it. It's bullying, and you've got to look at multiple things again. So it's not just that they withhold information, that's the bullying component. A bully hits on multiple levels. So if they're withholding information that sabotages your work, they're overly critical, the excessive micromanaging, they treat you differently than other people, they are yelling and cursing, and not that they have to do all of these, but I'm saying that any interaction is a negative interaction, then even just walking in the break room, you know, saying hello in the morning, any interaction's negative, then that would be a component of bullying, if that makes sense. Okay. So let's go to cultural sensitivity. So sometimes people are different because of their culture. And it's not just ethnicity or race. It can be religious beliefs. It could be sexuality. It could be abilities. It could be mental health. You know, and I was saying in my last call that I've noticed there's been, so one of the things is, what do you do? And I'll come back to the cultural, the mental health issue. But discuss diversity, talk about it, humbly ask questions. That's what I do. I'll have, you know, I used to have clients from a variety, and they would say, have you ever worked with such and such population? And what I found was it didn't matter if I worked with, let's say I had a family that was, had Mormon, they were of the Mormon faith. It didn't matter if I had a Mormon family, a family that believed or had the Mormon faith before, because this family would be totally different. So I'd have to say, you know, I have or I haven't, but either way I'm going to be asking a lot of questions if that's okay, because I want to completely understand your perspective, and they're fine with that. And so not asking, and asking the questions in an appropriate, not ignorant way, of course. Reading about different cultures. One thing that I've noticed, and DOI did this, is they've done a big push on educating about not just DOI nationwide, but the individual agencies, the bureaus. They've requested trainings at times, and they've done a push for educating people about post-traumatic stress disorder, because there's a big stereotype there about people with PTSD and veterans. And people assume that all veterans have PTSD. So it's more of an awareness and an education. And I feel like that is a subculture in its own. It's a mental health issue that people don't understand. The media's blown it up out of proportion, and so people are sometimes scared about it, and we assume that every veteran has PTSD, and it's a scary thing. So we have to, you know, so there's been a push to educate on that issue, which I have to applaud the groups that do it. We've had a lot of agencies, not just DOI, do that. But it's been something to overcome, because a lot of times I've had people say, oh, don't say that. He's got PTSD. He's going to blow up. And the employee's right there. And they don't know if the employee has PTSD or not. They just know the employee is maybe a veteran or something. And so that's what I mean. That could be considered, well, at minimum, it's really ignorant and really disrespectful. Let me just put it that way. I don't want to say ignorant, but it's disrespectful. And it may not be considered quite bullying, but it could make that person feel really disrespected. So it's misunderstanding. So something like that. So really being sensitive to people of different cultures. And again, use culture as a broad spectrum. So what was happening in some places I've seen is that it's okay to joke about mental health. Oh, yeah, well, you know him. He's bipolar, because everybody's, you know, labeled bipolar. So he's bipolar, and then people joke about it. Well, that's prejudicial, and that's insensitive. And so, but it's okay in our society to joke about mental health issues, but it's not okay to joke about, you know, religious beliefs or ethnicity or whatever. But mental health is the same. It's the same kind of thing. It's still kind of a civil right issue or a cultural sensitive issue that we need to be respectful of. But sometimes in our society, there's certain things that are okay. I guess what I'm saying is it's okay in society. Society set this rule that apparently it's okay to joke about some things, but not some things. So being aware of that, getting educated, and understanding that, because that could lead to bullying too, because somebody's a little bit different for whatever reason. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. So how do you do it? You participate in avoiding gossip. when people are talking about people, and that can be really hard because sometimes that gossip is really, really interesting, and so it can be really hard not to get involved in it. And even if you just say, is that something that's like, I mean, is this really true? Like, do they know you're telling me this? You know, that kind of thing, especially if it's something really, really private. You could just say that, and just by asking that question could kind of call somebody out and make them stop. Clarifying the values, giving positive praise, and listening. So what that means is saying things, you need to do your best to encourage and uplift people. So you could say, excuse me, but that joke may offend some people. You know, or I know people make a lot of jokes about that, but it really can be offensive to some people. I could hear you yelling. I think John did most of the work that you're crediting me for. And recently, this happens all the time because people don't know the ins and outs all the time of what you do. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's more of a team effort. And I had this happen to me a couple weeks ago where I got this accolade in a meeting for doing something, and actually it wasn't just me, it was 3 of us. And so I had to say, well, you know, I wanted to and I had to, like, this person also helped me and they did a lot of work, and this person also, this was a team effort, so that everybody, and then they were applauded as well. So it was, it's, you know, that kind of thing, because sometimes when there's sabotage and bullying, that person was purposefully left out, but you're overcoming that, you're helping. So as a witness, you have power to do that. Maybe somebody's absent from a meeting, and the person who's, if they're a bully, they're saying, well, of course, they never show up to a meeting, they don't care about this, this is the kind of employee they are. And you could say, well, actually, she's on a call with a client or a customer, or she had to take this very important call from blah, 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 or she had to go use the restroom, she'll be right there, you know, whatever it is, but you kind of express that and be very clear and kind of clarify, correct it, and not in a confrontational way so much, but just clarifying. If somebody doesn't get information, I noticed Paul didn't get that information he needed, so I went ahead and passed it on to him, or should we pass it on to, you know, are you going to get it to him, or do you want me to? Something like that. If somebody's left out, isn't Ann coming with us to lunch? And then I think we were all confused about that directive. And so I'm not saying that this is easy. It can be very difficult, because if you feel like you're confronting your supervisor, if you're intimidated by the person and you're afraid of how it's going to impact your job, so it's easier, safer to just stay quiet and not say anything. But there are things that you can do, and there's ways you can say it that aren't going to cause a huge conflict. And if you need more questions on that, or feedback on that, that's when EAP can also be very beneficial to help with. Does anybody do anything already that they found it kind of helps just create a more positive environment?
Just be supportive of your other coworkers that you're seeing. You know, if you notice you're not the only one being bullied by that person, you know, just offer support.
Right.
I make sure that I tell everyone thank you at the end of each day for everything that they've done and helped me out with, because if they know that I appreciate everything that they do.
Right. Good. Acknowledging their help, giving them credit. That's awesome. Anybody else? Okay. So those are great. So just little things, just like you said, saying thank you and being supportive of others, the little things add up. They really do. And you're planting seeds, and hopefully that seed grows into a field of, you know, wonderful support. But, it's just sometimes you're just needing to just plant the seed. So these are your resources. Obviously management, if you feel comfortable, and the appropriate staff. Now, you guys do have a chain of command, and that's very important to run an agency like DOI. And so it's really important that that chain of command is followed. So what you don't want to do, what the chain of command usually does not like is when you bypass somebody to about something that was never addressed with. I mean, they don't. I'm not really saying this very clearly, but sometimes when you bypass to complain, and it's not, and it's just a general complaint that needs to really be addressed with the manager, not like a severe bullying, harassment type complaint. That's when it gets rough. But if you feel like you're truly being bullied, then, you know, and I think the best route, honestly, is HR and making that phone call, or EEO, but I think it's also appropriate to go to a manager. Maybe you have a couple managers on staff and going to somebody that you feel safe with. And if you don't feel safe with one, then going to another one can be perfectly appropriate if it's, you know, at the right time and things like that. And so, and acknowledging that there is a chain of command, but then going to somebody else. But what is problematic is when there's something that, you know, you feel like you're going to go above your manager just because you don't like him and you don't want to deal with him or her. You know, that's not where it's really seen very positively. But if you're feeling really afraid or scared or intimidated, then perhaps it might be appropriate to go to up the chain of command, if that makes sense. So, and if you don't know, then again, I'd go with HR, EEO, or, and you know, you can always call EAP for support. And they can walk you through that and help you kind of figure out something that might help you as well, or at least provide that emotional support. So in a summary, if you see it, say something. If you can, do something. If you feel, even if it's just treating that person with respect. We want to target the bullying behavior, not the person. It's not the person's fault. They're not the reason the bullying is occurring. The behavior is inappropriate. And do your part to contribute to a respectful and civil workplace. Let's see. Let me see if there's any. Okay. So, EAP. This is our phone number. It's confidential. It's referrals for you and your family members, so your domestic partners and parents of you or your domestic, if they live with you, your household members. Let me just put it that way. Your household members, parents, including parents, partners, and children. And then you can call us. You can also go to eapconsultants.com and go to Interior EAP is your password. And you click on Sign In. If you have any specific questions, you're always welcome. I would run this by, like I said, those resources that you have. Everybody's situation is so individual, and it can't just be answered, unfortunately, with, is this bullying? It has to be kind of explored, what's the situation, and document what you've seen, what's been done, that kind of thing, and then bring that to look at, because we need to look at the whole picture, and that's something that, like I said, HR, EEO might be a good resource for. So that concludes my part. So I was going to open it up for questions. Comments, anything?
Well, this is Valerie. I wanted to ask if HR and EEO, are they apprised of this bullying criteria?
Well, they should have your actual policy.
But I just asked about that, and all I got was a harassment policy. There is no bullying policy that I assume when I ask my supervisor for the bullying policy, and he hands me the harassment policy, that there is no bullying policy.
I'd clarify that too, because you've also got a workplace violence policy. You've got, there's all kinds of different, so they may not have a specific bullying policy. And Joy, you may know more about this, but that's why I would, go ahead.
There's several policies that are related, including the harassment policy and the workplace violence policy. Bullying is a form of harassment. And it is a form of harassment. So no, there is not. I'm not in employee relations, but I'm not aware of a specific policy, but those policies cover bullying. So
it may warrant a conversation with ELR, EEO, or HR looking at all the policies or explaining your situation, and they can help you determine whether there's a policy violation and showing you the policy too. So sorry it's not a more direct answer.
Oh, well, it's not your fault that DOI doesn't, specifically address bullying.
Where is the best place to look for EEO information?
Joy, do you have that answer?
I believe the Office of Civil Rights does have a web page.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's where I would look first.
Okay. Any other questions?
So would you say that the management consult procedure with EAP is a good way to find out if the efforts that you've gone through so far to try to bring bullying to your supervisor's attention has been sufficient? Because so far I've gotten 0 out of my management on it.
Okay, sorry. I don't think I understand the question, so I apologize.
Well, but I don't want to dwell just on my particular situation, but if an employee feels like they're having trouble getting through to management about a bullying situation, would a management consultation with EAP be a logical step?
It could be, yeah, and if they're open to it, it's voluntary. So if you say, but we don't guide in policies, we just guide in human behavior. You know what I mean? So and I work very closely with, I always consult with HR when there gets to be, I don't consult with them. I encourage the manager to consult with HR. So sometimes there might be a conversation between the three of us, but if they want to know, why does my employee feel like they're being bullied, I can definitely help with that. Does that make sense?
Okay.
The CATER office is also a great resource for situations like that.
The what office?
Yes.
The CATER, the Conflict and Alternative Dispute Resolution Office.
That's that mediation.
It's the mediation office that was mentioned earlier.
Sometimes in DOI, though, you are going to find that even when you go through the steps that running into walls and it's not being helped. I've actually gone through all of the steps that were presented to me or that I did the research on, and a lot of times it isn't resolved, but you just have to keep documenting and keep going back, and that you're going to get a resolution at one point.
And I think that, I hate to say it, I think that goes for a lot of jobs. It goes for a lot of companies because it may not fit within the policies. And jobs are required to follow their policies. And if it's not in the policies, there may not be anything they can do about it, even if they feel like it shouldn't happen. So I know that sounds odd, and that's why I'm saying at minimum, do what you can to help yourself, help build your resilience, and I'm not saying accept the bullying. I'm saying don't accept that you are not as worthwhile and as capable as you think you are. So believe in yourself, basically. And sometimes you have to rebuild that. And sometimes you have to do what you can to help your own internal resilience and help you support yourself. And so at minimum, sometimes the outcome's not what we want it to be. Sometimes the outcome's not what the company would want it to be, but because of the way certain things are, it doesn't quite fall into any certain category, there's nothing that can be done, or whatever. And that comes across the board in it doesn't matter if it's corporate, it doesn't matter if it's government, you run into that over and over and over again. So taking care of yourself and being that strong person for yourself is really critical. And whether it's through EAP or your friends or just doing things that you love to do that rejuvenate you, whatever is good for you is the best. Any other questions or comments or anything?
I did see a counselor recommended by EAP, and one of the things he recommended to me for my self-improvement was the book called The Artist Way, and go through that 12-week program, and it is helpful. It does help you learn about yourself, so if people are needing something to help them with that, that's a good resource to use.
Good, and thank you for sharing.
What was the name of that?
The book is called The Artist Way. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the author. It's been out for a while. It was originally designed by a writer, but it can be used in any area. But again, it's The Artist Way.
Thank you.
It's on Amazon.com. The author is Julia Cameron. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I think that's all. So I appreciate everybody on the call, and please call us if you need us, and take care of yourself. And like I said, I appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.